So the New York Mets might have lost their series against the San Diego Padres in pretty embarrassing fashion on Wednesday, but there was still a lot of great news today because both Pete Alonso and Starling Marte look to have avoided an IL stint. That is massive news for this team. I'm going to talk about that on the show today. I'll also touch on the loss as Chris Bassitt seems to be going through a real rough patch. And then, since All-Star voting has officially opened, I want to break down which Mets could make the All-Star team this season. A lot to talk about on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. As I record right now, the Mets are losing 13-2 in the bottom of the eighth inning, so I figured this game is about done. 12:30 Eastern time as I record. Really the last game of this West Coast trip for this East Coast podcaster, because got a day off on Thursday, Friday. Yes, the Mets do play on the West Coast as they do for the entire weekend, but I usually only record on Sundays, and that is a game where we have a 7 o'clock start. So I'm feeling pretty good that we've survived the hardest part of this West Coast trip, but it was a rough game for the Mets. Before we get into that, though, the big news of the day is Pete Alonso and Starling Marte both appear to have avoided IL stints. For Pete Alonso, I think it's pretty clear that he's okay. There is no fracture in his hand right now. They're just waiting for the swelling to come down. Pete talked about how he's very familiar with this injury. He said 3 broken hands in the past and has had other contusions on his hand. So he knows how to deal with it. The training staff knows how to deal with it. They're going to wait, make sure the swelling comes down before they put him back out there. But he should avoid an IL stint. You could see him this weekend in Anaheim. Starling Marte with the quad injury also appears like he has avoided an IL stint. I'm not entirely sure on that one, only because Khalil Lee was the guy they ended up calling up from AAA Syracuse. If that thing's still a little bit tight and you're going into this series, could you maybe see the Mets put him on the IL? Just make sure he heals 100% properly so you avoid a further injury, considering that is one where, he could aggravate it. That's still on the table, but I think the bottom line is he avoided a significant injury that will have him out for a long time. So the Mets should have both these guys back potentially as soon as this weekend, but regardless in short order. And considering what we, didn't know going into the night yesterday, I think you feel pretty great about that. And it does soften the blow of this loss a little bit. But the game was not great. Chris Bassitt struggled again, 7 runs allowed. You look back to when Max Scherzer went down, and there was this idea that Bassitt could carry the rotation as the ace, which I talked about a lot in this show. And clearly he just has failed to do that up to this point. Had a 2.34 ERA in his first 7 starts before Scherzer went down. In his 5 starts since, a 7.62 ERA. And a lot of that has been getting destroyed by the NOS, particularly by the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Padres. He fared well in his 1 start against the Diamondbacks, which is, the worst team in that division. You look at what he's done against the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Padres, a 10.07 ERA this season. Against everyone else's ERA is 2.03. So maybe just getting him away from those teams is all that matters. But what we have been seeing is Bass has been falling behind in counts, not quite as accurate as he's been. It seems like he never quite has all of his pitches, where he's just not confident the way he was early in the season, where it seemed like he could put any pitch in his bag wherever he wanted it to. He's hanging more pitches. He's getting hit a lot harder. It's definitely concerning. He has a large enough sample size as a really quality starting pitcher that I'm not completely sounding the alarm bells on Chris Bassitt, but it is definitely something to monitor. You look at these past 5 starts, it was 4 earned and 6 1/3 against the Cardinals, 8 earned in 4 1/3 against the Giants. He then had a great start against the Phillies where he only allowed 1 over 6 innings. Then he had 3 earned in 6 innings pitched against the Dodgers. And then this blow up tonight where he doesn't make it out of the fourth and ultimately gives up 7 runs. So we'll see on Chris Bassitt. I think we're about to talk about All-Star, and he has all but eliminated himself from contention to be an All-Star this season. Carlos Carrasco is now the one starter that even has an outside shot at it, and I don't think that's likely. The Mets starting pitching has not been great since Scherzer went down. They've done a great job winning via their offense, but I think the fact that you're getting Tyler McGill back over the weekend, the fact that Jacob deGrom could come back, I would say at the end of the month, because that was the original timeline. I don't think that's going to happen, but by the All-Star break, I think you could see deGrom back in the rotation as well. There is help on the way on that front, so I think the Mets rotation will inevitably be okay, but this is still a tough period they're trying to get through. The one last thing I want to talk about this game is the fact that JD Davis is already showing that he can't play first base either. And I am sometimes really hard on JD Davis, and people can knock me on it, but I can't watch this guy anymore in the field. I'm sorry. If JD Davis is listening, I apologize for being that asshole that continues to talk about your defense. But at the same time, you look at the numbers, and statistically speaking, he has been the worst defender in baseball since the Mets got this guy. And that's why I have time and again wanted JD Davis to get traded somewhere, wanted the Mets to just cut bait with him. He is a player that to me is the ultimate mirage because you see him hit the ball hard and you think, wow, what could he be? But there's a reason why a really smart organization in the Astros gave up on him because the defense is so bad. He doesn't hit home runs. It's all line drives. And as hard as you can hit the ball on the ground, that's not going to make you an effective piece of the Mets lineup. And so I look at the detriment he is defensively, and you cannot play this guy anywhere but in the DH spot. At third base, since he came to the Mets, he has minus 25 defensive runs saved. That is the 6th worst mark of all defenders in baseball during that span. But who he's tied with in 6th place there for the worst defender in baseball is Elvis Andres, who has 3,192 innings played compared to JD Davis, where it's just 912 at third base. You throw in the minus 9 defensive runs saved in the outfield, and he statistically becomes the worst defender in baseball based on that metric, playing way less innings than all these other guys. To give you more context, that title would go to Nick Castellanos in right field with minus 31 defensive runs saved, but that's in 3,152 and 2/3 innings. You look at Alec Boehm, someone who I've talked about a lot this season, and prior to that, it's a terrible defensive third baseman for the Phillies. He's at minus 29 defensive runs saved at third base in his young career. Not great, but that's in 1,534 and a third innings, which is over 600 innings more than JD Davis, who has racked up, again, minus 25 defensive runs saved without even hitting 1,000 innings played. The guy is atrocious defensively, and I can't see it anymore. The Mets are better off. If Pete can't play this weekend, even if he can DH and can't play first base, well, then by all means, bench JD, put Mark Canha at first base, and go with either Nick Plummer or Khalil Lee in the outfield. It's just that simple because that's going to be a lot better defensively than running this guy out there. There was 4 or 5 plays I saw today that, could have been made. The first one was the RBI hit in the first inning. The expected batting average on it was 160. Jaden Davis never gets off the line at all and dives to try to make the play. That's a routine grounder if Pete Alonso is playing first base. And Bassitt maybe gets out of that inning without giving up a run. I can't suddenly say that changes his whole night, but it would have gotten it off to a better start, that's for sure. With all of that said, I don't want Mets fans to be all doom and gloom because the Braves and the Phillies are winning. Oh my God. Reel it in a little bit because one of the things that I've mentioned before on the show, definitely on Twitter, is that last year, the New York Mets, as much as we talk about that great collapse, the fact that they held first base for 90 days, their largest division lead across that entire span was 5.5 games, even with the Braves winning 7 in a row and the Phillies winning 6 in a row. The Braves are 7 back right now. The Phillies are 10 back. And considering the winning streaks they just have gone on, they're due to lose some games. So the Mets are by no means in trouble just yet. You don't have to hit the panic button. You can do that when the Braves get within 5 games. And even then, it's a long season and there's ebbs and flows. This was not going to be a 162 game marathon where you just got to sit back in the recliner and cruise the whole time. I guess that happened in 86. And you know what? Maybe the Mets end up going on a hot streak soon. And maybe I'm even wrong about that. Maybe this is one of those years. But I really do think that there is ebbs and flows in every season. There's going to be points where a team is going to threaten. The Braves, I believe, are a playoff team. And with that, they will get close to the Mets at some point this year. But I still hold on to the idea that when this Mets team gets DeGrom and Scherzer back, and once they can really start to fire on all cylinders, they're going to really pull away with this division again. So right now, it's a little bit of a skid. But if you rewind to before the series against the Phillies and the Nationals, when we were looking ahead towards this West Coast trip, if you had said that the Mets were going to win, 9 of the next 16 games, you would have been thrilled. Now, the math changed when they swept those 2 series, but that is where they're at right now. They've already won 9 games. If they go out and they win this series against the Angels, they'll have a 5-5 West Coast trip, which would be exactly what you were hoping for going into it. Even if they only take one of those games against the Angels, you're still looking at 4-6 and not the end of the world when you stacked up those 6 wins prior. So right now, tough little bit for the Mets here to get through. But considering the fact that we thought we might be staring down a future with this Mets team, we'll have to go without Pete Alonso and Starling Marte. I look at everything and say, hey, the Mets are in great shape considering what could have been. Now, I want to talk about All-Star since the voting has started. But first, I don't know about you, but I love a chewy, chocolatey brownie, especially if there's some caramel swirled on top. And you're in luck because the caramel brownie bar gives you all of those flavors, and they're available now at built.com. You got to act fast, though, because this fan favorite could go soon. Forget about dessert. These are better than a dessert with only 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar. I'd replace a regular brownie with Built Caramel Brownie Bar in a heartbeat because it tastes that good and it's so much more healthier for you. I don't think that was a correct sentence, but who cares? Built tastes that good and Built is that good for you. They come covered in 100% real chocolate. So with Built, you don't have to sacrifice tasty for healthy. You can have both. If you want to try Built bars today, go to built.com, get your box of caramel brownie bars now. And at built.com, make sure you use our promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All-Star voting is open. I know there's been some listeners who have requested an episode where we talk about the All-Star cases for the Mets top players, and we're going to do that right now. All of these stats were coming into the day today. Okay, so that's just one thing I want to note at the beginning when we're comparing all these guys from around the National League. We'll start the most obvious one. Pete Alonso should absolutely be an all-star. I think he has the most slam dunk case of anyone. There's good competition at first base. I don't know if he deserves to be an all-star starter, only because there's this guy named Paul Goldschmidt who's hitting 341 with a 423 on base percentage and a 606 slugging percentage for a really good Cardinals team that he is leading. His 188 WRC plus, the best mark among first base. It might even be the best mark in the National League the last time I checked. 12 home runs, 47 RBIs, 2.9 FWAR, trailing only Mookie Betts, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, no, only Mookie Betts and Manny Machado. I actually just wrote an article for Just Baseball earlier this week breaking down the early favorites for MVP, and I had Goldschmidt third behind both Betts and Machado, who had number 1 currently, although I think as this season progresses, Goldschmidt might be the guy that wins the MVP this year. That's how good he's been, and that's the way he's trending because he's been red hot since the calendar turned to May. So Goldschmidt should be the starting first baseman, but Pete Alonso should be the reserve. And not to mention, would we be surprised at all with the popularity of Pete Alonso if he did end up getting the votes to be the starting first baseman? I would not be shocked at all. That's why all of you should vote for him. Even though I'm saying that Goldschmidt is more deserving, you want your Mets in there. I don't know if I necessarily support the ballots that have Tomas Nido or James McCann on it, where you just go straight Mets all the way through. If you want to do that, it's your prerogative. When it comes to Alonso, though, he's definitely all-star worthy, and with that, vote for him to be a starter. He has 16 home runs, which is the most among any first baseman, 54 RBIs. Again, most among any first baseman. Last time I checked was most in the National League, as was his home run lead, tied with Mookie Betts, although I'm not sure if Betts has homered since then. So that is the obvious case. I will say Freddie Freeman could be a third first baseman that would make this team. He's hitting 288, 372 on base, 447, slugging a 131 WRC plus compared to Pete, 152 WRC plus. Pete has been the better offensive player, but when you look at their F4, their wins above replacement by Fangraphs, Freddie Freeman been more valuable with the 2.1 F4 compared to 1.6 for Alonso. That is mostly due to defense and maybe a little bit on base running. Now you move on to second base. Should Jeff McNeil be the starting second baseman? There's a case. The case is he's leading all second basemen with his 311 average, 365 on base, 442 slugging. Is behind someone like Jazz Chisholm, who has a 541 slugging percentage, but the composite is really good. You look at his WRC plus, the second best among all second basemen. And again, I should mention, I don't think I did on the show today. For those of you who might be new, WRC plus is a statistic measuring hitters based on a league average of 100. It's weighted runs created plus. So for Jeff McNeil at 134, he is 34% better than your league average hitter and 2% behind Jazz Chisholm with his 136 WRC plus. Chisholm, a 255 hitter, 310 on base, 541 slugging. He is the definition of a star with that Miami Marlins team. Could be their all-star, although I think they're going to get some all-stars with their pitchers, and maybe that holds him out of this if it has to come down to a reserve vote. He does have 10 home runs and 37 RBIs, 9 stolen bases, a 2 F4. I think Chisholm should be an all-star, but Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, probably ahead of him on the pecking order when it comes to the Marlins. You look at Tommy Edmond. He is currently the leader in the clubhouse to be the starting second baseman, but he's been playing shortstop recently, so I don't know how that ultimately factors in. He's in 278 with the Cardinals, 357 on base, 415 slugging, a 124 WRC plus. Comes a little bit below Chisholm and McNeil, but you look at his F4 at 2.7. Extremely valuable, a great defender at second, has been great over at shortstop too, has scored 45 runs, 23 RBIs, 14 stolen bases. He absolutely deserves to be an all-star. And you also have someone that could push Jeff McNeil off if we're talking about infielders, and that is Brandon Drury. That's right, former Met Brandon Drury, a Mets legend, is having a great year in Cincinnati. 266 batting average, 326 on base, 514 slugging. He has 11 home runs, 30 RBIs, a 128 WRC plus, and a 1.4 F4. The reason why he could knock off of Jeff McNeil is because of the rule that you need a player for each team. He could be the Reds all-star. I don't know who else is really playing at an all-star level. So Drury could be a token all-star this year, and maybe that knocks McNeil off. But McNeil has another chance, so to speak, because of his play in the outfield. When it comes to outfielders, it's maybe even a more wide open field. There's bigger names, but the stat that I found today that was just fascinating is that if you look at the top 3 outfielders based on F4 this season, that tells us how valuable these players are, right? Wins above replacement. Mookie Betts, 3.5, head and shoulders, the best outfielder in the National League, arguably maybe even the best outfielder in baseball at times, although Aaron Judge has something to say about it this year, and Mike Trout has had something to say about that for the past decade. But you got Betts at number 1 in the National League. Then you have Brandon Nimmo and Jeff McNeil at second and third, tied at 1.8 for their F4. The next closest is Ian Happ at 1.6 and Jerkson Profar at 1.6 as well. I want to talk about the outfield a little bit. Could the Mets also get a pitcher into the All-Star game? We'll get to that in just a minute after a word from our sponsors. All right, so Mookie Betts, as I already said, is a given to make the All-Star team this year. He'll be out in right field, unless I guess they put 2 other corner guys out there and they push him over to center for the game, but he's going to be an All-Star. Juan Soto is a very interesting case because you would just pencil him in on opening day. He'll be starting in the All-Star game. But this year he's hitting 225, 373 on base, gets on base a ton, 456 slugging, 12 home runs, only 21 RBIs, 1.1 F4, trailing Nimmo and Mcneill pretty significantly. That's due to defense. He still has a 134 WRC plus. He's got to pick it up a bit to be worthy of an all-star game, but he's also going to be the de facto Nationals all-star unless a Josh Bell takes it from him. I just don't know there. I think that Soto likely ends up starting the All-Star game anyway, just because he's a star. He'll probably do well in the voting, but he doesn't really deserve it with the way he's played so far this season. Other names to look at, Ronaldo Cunha Jr. He could make it as a star in the voting, but he's also earning it because he's playing at an unbelievable level. Really, because his season's been cut shorter, his numbers don't hold up over the guys who have played for the full season. But you look at his sample size, he's been the second best outfielder in the National League this year, no question. He's hitting 320, 411 on base, 534 slugging in 27 games, 159 WRC plus, so 59% better than your league average hitter. He's stolen 10 bases already. I think he has 5 bombs. He's unbelievable. And he's a big reason why the Braves have started winning a little bit because they have their star player back. I could absolutely see the group that you would have gone into the season thinking as the starting outfield of being Betts, Acuna, Soto. And really, those are the best 3 outfielders probably in the league anyway. Now, some other names to talk about. You got Dalton Varsho. He has a chance kind of similar to, a Brandon Drury to be the one token all-star for a team with the Diamondbacks. Hitting 243, 316 on base, 427 slugging, 8 home runs, 24 RBIs, 106 WRC plus, but he's great defensively. He catches and plays in the outfield, a 1.4 F WAR. Maybe they make him the backup catcher on the All-Star team, and that's how they kind of squeeze this out and get some more players packed in because there's not a lot of good catchers. Wilson Contreras and JT Realmuto stand out, but really Contreras is the one that has the All-Star worthy numbers. That's why I've talked about the Mets trading for him. Regardless, I can see Varsho being the Diamondbacks All-Star this year, unless they go with a pitcher, but Merrill Kelly has really slowed down from his early season success. So I don't know if he'll be the one to represent Arizona in that game. Outside of that, you got Kyle Schwarber, who was hitting below the Mendoza line before the game tonight, but he went 2 for 5 to get over that. I think he's hitting 209 now, has 14 home runs. Could he keep slugging and find his way into the All-Star game? Absolutely. Jock Peterson, thanks to that monster series against the Mets, has a 160 WRC plus on the season and 13 home runs. Those are numbers potentially worthy of getting in the All-Star game if he can stay hot for this final month here. You have Mike Yashremski also on the Giants. He has a 387 on base percentage, which is the best mark of qualified outfielders, assuming Betts is lower than that, which I believe it is. I believe he is. Betts' stats were so given that I didn't even look up his on-base percentage. So I didn't even pull Betts' stats because his F WAR is insane. Let's see, 381 on base. So yeah, Yashremski is higher than that at 387. So he's got that one statistic. He also has a 141 WRC plus. So he's got a shot at it. Other than that, though, you look at Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo. I think both of them have a chance to play their way into the All-Star game over this final month. I don't think either of them gets in based on votes. Hey, Mets fans, maybe you can make that happen. I just don't see it. But both of them right now, if you look at F4, as I already mentioned, right atop the leaderboards, if they can be hot over the final 4 or 5 weeks here, they got a shot at it. Nimmo's hitting 266. Again, this was prior to the game tonight. 369 on base, 402 slugging, a 771 OPS, a 127 WRC plus, 3 home runs, 31 runs scored, 18 RBIs. I think Mcneill is ultimately the Mets' second All-Star, very similar to in 2019 where he joined Pete in the game. He's hitting 311. Coming in today, that was 4th in the National League, 365 on base, 442 slugging, a 134 WRC plus, 27 runs scored, 27 RBIs. I got a feeling it'll be Pete and McNeil, and then maybe Edwin Diaz is the Mets' final All-Star. Carlos Carrasco, to his credit, had a 1.8 F WAR, which was tied with Sandy Alcantara coming into the day for the 3rd best mark in the National League. Alcantara might be the best pitcher in the league after tonight, going 9 scoreless from the Marlins, and he got the Jacob deGrom treatment where he got no run support, went into extras before the Marlins finally found a way to win. But devastating for Alcantara to essentially pitch a shutout and not get credit for it. But he'll be ahead of Carrasco, so maybe Carrasco's 4th in F4 as you're listening to this today. So certainly all-star worthy, but you look at his 3.52 ERA and you have other guys out there with really low ERAs that maybe haven't been quite as valuable because they haven't pitched as many innings, but I still think they get the nod over Carrasco unless, the coaches and everyone understands when they're filling out the reserves that the Mets have been such a great team this year that they deserve more all-stars. Maybe he gets in. I just wouldn't count on it. He would have to have a great, final month here leading into the All-Star game. If he has 4 or 5 more great starts and he carries this rotation, maybe. I wouldn't count him out. Edwin Diaz, though, is really the one other guy you could look at to be an all-star this year. His 16.28 strikeout per 9 rate is the best mark in the National League. His 11 saves are the 5th most. His 2.38 ERA is actually 25th among NL relievers, so that's a little bit surprising. But I think being the closer of a potential first-place team, assuming the Mets hold up what they've done so far this year over the final month into the All-Star break, I think he's got a pretty good shot to be a third all-star for the Mets, maybe even the second best odds I would put on any player to make the all-star team outside of Pete Alonso. I think Pete Alonso is the one given. Francisco Lindor. How did I miss Francisco? Wow, dude. West Coast trips. I'm glad I caught it before I finished recording this show. When I've been a Francisco Lindor fan or stan all year, going through his stats and telling you how he's been the best shortstop in the National League. Stats still back that up. When it comes to F4, when it comes to WRC+, he only trails Trey Turner. I know those off the top of my head. He's also leading shortstops in home runs, RBIs, maybe even runs scored. I cannot believe I almost forgot Francisco Lindor. But I remembered before it was over. We're leaving all that in just that way. I'm not making myself look any smarter. I will say now, the 2 locks I would have for the All-Star team this year is Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor. I think Jeff Mcneill and Edwin Diaz have a good shot at it. And I think Carlos Carrasco and Brandon Nimmo, if they can get hot over this final month and really finish out strong, could potentially be All-Stars as well. Man, I cannot believe that I did that on Lindor. That is crazy. Absolutely nuts. Maybe I've been fanboying too much all year that I was worn out from it. I don't know. Maybe it's just almost 1 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast after our potential final game here of this West Coast trip where I got to record a podcast like this. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, Friday Farm Report, as always, also a series preview what lies ahead against the Angels. Thank you for making this your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.